Now, consciousness grids are a fascinating thing to work with. Different regions all over the world have different qualities within their consciousness grid. Okay. Now, it may seem counterintuitive, but in the Middle East, there was some of the highest level consciousness grids on the planet. Now, you can see why it's a targeting of so much war is because the powers that be have an agenda to dampen it as much as possible. So of course they bombed and made war in some of the areas where it used to be pristine Stargate hubs for higher consciousness. No more. Okay. The architecture that held it within this morphic field has been destroyed with bombing or whatever. So that's not to say that they don't exist on this planet, because there's a lot, and they also kind of crop up because it's a as above so below kind of thing. It has to exist, it has to have some level of expression. So don't get too far into despair. I mean, it is awful, the war, don't get me wrong, it's awful what they're doing. It's a crime against humanity, and definitely do your part that you feel drawn to do to participate in spreading the message of forgiveness, of the importance of us wanting to make peace. Peace will not happen if nobody wants it. So we need to keep speaking out, speaking out, speaking out, and call people out on their bullshit about that. I mean, oh my goodness. Don't get me, I'm going to reel myself back in from going down that road. Whew. Okay, back to Stargates and Gridworks. Okay, so there are very high levels of consciousness grids. And then, of course, there's a lot of incepted consciousness grids. And you can feel it. You'll go into depressed areas that feel really heavy. And I mean, I must have driven across this country a dozen times, north and south and east and west. And, different areas of the country feel so differently compared to others. It's the consciousness, it's the collective consciousness within the people. But then there's these incepted grids of consciousness. When I say incepted, they're incepted by ley line inception, or they use monuments and other sorts of complexes to influence geometrically and energetically, intentionally, and with weight. Weight is another way to influence energy lines on the earth too. And so they put these massive monuments and stuff up to influence the field of these different grids that are based on that energy line. Okay. So when you have one person that's awake to their multidimensional nature, whatever level that is, that's impactful to the grids. Just existing someplace impacts the collective grids. Absolutely. Okay. Now, when you do grid work, this is really a beautiful thing, because what these consciousness grids do is they interact with the human, usually on a subconscious level. So they kind of like steer humans in certain directions, or towards certain tendencies on a subconscious level. Okay. Um, and then these inceptions have to do with division, have to do with prejudice, it has to do with lack, lots of I'm not good enough, not being worthy, all those things, right? And the fear mongering about the collapse of this and the collapse of that. Yes, folks, they actually insert stuff like that into the collective grid to hold people in fear in those boxes. Okay. So when you have one person who is awoke multidimensionally to different levels, that starts shifting the grid. But when you get multiple people together, then that shifts those grids exponentially. And it's actually possible to completely dismantle certain inception hubs. Okay. And that's where you get, different people online doing grid work. They do all sorts of stuff. We do it too. That's what those quantum activations very often are involved in, is activating or reestablishing the anchoring of very high level consciousness grids globally, right? So there's the macro and the micro on that. So you have like the consciousness grids of the area that you're in, but then you have like the continent, then you have the region, and then you have, of course, the planetarily, solar ring level, Milky Way level, cosmic level. I mean, it's all nesting dolls, right? These consciousness grids. So you can affect them, impact them in certain ways. Now, the inception ones are normally done regionally or connected to an energy line. So it's impacting a region of a continent, the region of the globe, stuff like that. That can absolutely be impacted by collective work. The reopening, the reestablishment of stargates, that can also be done collectively. These are not things that are possible unless you're a fully realized being, like the being that we identify as, the being currently known as Jesus, or the being currently known as Krishna, or the being currently known as, the true Bodhisattva level. Unless you're an individual like that, you're not going to have a strong impact on those grids. Collectively, though, we connect, then we can exponentially impact those grids. So everybody has their own way of working. I love in-person work. I prefer that above Zoom work, right? Or internet work or whatever. I mean, I like doing things on the internet, and it's definitely worth it. It's definitely worth it for everybody involved. But when we can do things in person, that is so much more potent for all involved. And of course, the ripple effect that goes through the collective fields. Um, you can quite literally cut through hundreds of years of collective field tinkering, contaminating in a single ceremony with a group of people. And I use that word ceremony lightly. I don't mean it as a big thing. Actually, so in 2019, Lightbody, we did a trip to, well, it was to well, we hit several places. It was Croatia, Bosnia, and Herzegovina. And so Bosnia and Herzegovina are one entity, but kind of like two countries. They're one administrative entity, but consider themselves separate. One is the Catholic side, the other is the Muslim side. Bosnia being the Muslim side, and of course, Herzegovina being the Catholic side. But it's kind of one country. So you pass through one international border, I should say. So we went there originally to work with the Bosnian pyramids and the Ravna tunnels and all this stuff. But the very first place we had to go was on the coast of Croatia, in this medieval town, medieval city named Split. Okay. And what we discovered there was one of the oldest temples, active temples, built on a very, very potent energy line. It was a cross section of multiple energy lines, and it was originally built as the Temple of Jupiter. It was built in like 400, well, they said 400 BC. I believe it's older than that. But it was originally constructed in 400 BC. And then somewhere during the Christian Revolution, it was repurposed as the temple of Jean the Baptiste. And it was right across. So as medieval cities, I don't know if you've ever been to a medieval city, but they kind of like the medieval architecture gets built on and modified, and it has very narrow streets. There's no cars, because it was before, cars were a thing. So the streets are very narrow, and there's lots of layers of buildings. There's lots of layers to these cities. And so this temple, you walked upstairs, short stairs to, where there's sphinxes in the front. Some of them, I think, a bit defaced, but sphinxes, and it faced the door of the temple faced this giant basilica right across the way. So it was like a pathway that went right to the basilica. And at the time, we weren't really quite sure what we needed to do, but we knew we needed to do something. And of course we get there and our intuition kicks in and we start doing the work. So master built temples have something called magical squares in the front. So anyway, we activated an intuitively led magic squares. We activated the temple, and when we went in it, the roof was full of all these flowers and stars, but there was these awful menacing faces. And and then there's the baptismal pool in the center, and then all this other stuff on the outside. So we started doing our unwinding process. I mean, there was just a handful of us that time around, and we did our process. And two of the ladies actually reported that there was a wall that they were guided to face. And as soon as they faced the wall, they were looking out into this vast field. And it's like, so they can see a parallel reality like right there. You know, it's like the wall didn't exist. So, I mean, this is the kind of thing that happens when frequencies get liberated, when all these nesting dolls of holding energies down, blind spots down, get opened. It's all of a sudden the magnitude of the interdimensional space you're in becomes, you know, clear. And we finished doing what we were doing. And as soon as we came together and held hands, the bells of the basilica started chiming, beautiful bells. And then we look up, and all those menacing faces were now smiling at us. They were smiling, happy, jubilant faces. Okay. So the point of me telling you this story is so you can realize just how infiltrated this reality is and how powerful we are to unraveling that. So that ley line penetrated many sacred places all through Eastern Europe, all through the Balkans, right? So after that, we go to another place in Croatia, and then we eventually bounced over into Herzegovina and visited certain places, key places that were important. One of them being Medjugorje, which were the famous apparition of Mary. That was a spontaneous visit that wasn't scheduled. But, you know, when you're on these magical journeys, this is what happens. Just, you know, things that you don't imagine being a thing all of a sudden show up, and you need to do it. And then we also went to the oldest operating Muslim Sufi temple in Eastern Europe, or what was previously the Ottoman Empire, and that was really, really cool too. I so resonate with the Sufis, and this was built outside of a cliff, a sheer cliff face with a massive spring that came out of it. They had the most pristine blue water you've ever seen, and anyway, so grid work can take many forms, and when you do it in person, it can become a much larger journey, like what we did with the Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. But you can also do it in key points. Like there's a town here in Colorado, high in the San Luis Valley, that is a massive interdimensional junction. There's a huge Stargate not far from that area, from that town. And there's also lots and lots and lots of vortexes and interdimensional interchange points. In fact, that town has the most concentration of ashrams, stupas, and spiritual centers than anywhere in the world because of all the vortexes. I'm talking, Sedona has nothing on this place. Okay. Now, Sedona is beautiful. It's very built up and it's luxurious. And this place is not. It's small town, mountain town. And if you guys been to a small mountain town, you know what I mean. It's very, low key, full of interesting people that wish to be left alone on the most part. So anyway, I don't mean to digress too much, but however you are drawn to do it is exactly how it needs done, because it's our authenticity. It's through our authenticity as a human being that we are going to reclaim this reality for the truth of who we are. That is how we're going to do it. All of us are very individual, all very different. We have different flavors, but the key here is that walking our purpose, which means our authenticity. Okay, walking with the dignity that we are a divine being in a biosuit here to do something. Okay, and I don't mean go to work and pay taxes. There's much bigger purpose for us. It could be your whole journey is about learning how to be in your authenticity. That could be your purpose. That's an amazing purpose, because you are in a biosuit where you're rearranging the activation DNA and the way your DNA dancing in order to achieve that. You see what I mean? So it's still relevant to everybody you're connected to. All of your ancestors, all of the future generations of your family are impacted by you walking a path of authenticity. Okay, so it could be that simple. It could be more grandiose. It could be very low key. It's all you. It's all you. Only you can know. There's no formula. You have to figure it out. And that's part of the joy of it. That's part of the adventure.